Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. A guy named Jeff. My parents belonged to a very tight-knit religious community. In their church, families have known each other for generations, so this made secrets hard to keep. My mom used to be somewhat of a Bible school teacher for kids, and one of her students was a teenager I'll call Jeff. Both of my parents saw Jeff grow up and be a relatively normal teenager. About a month after I was born, they took me to church. After services were over, they got in their car and were ready to leave, and that's when they noticed the strangest thing. Jeff was staring at me through the window. His hands were pressed on it, and he had a terrified look on his face. My dad asked him if he was okay, and he didn't answer. He just shook his head in absolute fear. Finally, my dad honked the horn, and Jeff jumped back as if he had just disconnected from a trance. He then glanced at my parents and ran back inside the church. My parents commented on how odd his behavior was, but soon forgot all about it. Jeff went on a trip to New York and didn't come back until I was about 7 months old. It was around that time that my mom started worrying about his approach to me. Babies are always considered adorable, so my mom was used to people begging to hold me. But Jeff was different. My name is the same as a princess in fairy tales, so at first my mom didn't think it was strange that Jeff would always call me princess before saying my name. He would grab my face and kiss me for long periods, and would beg my mom to let him take me outside by himself. He would tell her things like, "I'm just so in love with her eyes. They're just the most beautiful I've ever seen." My mom got very suspicious and began to try to limit my contact with him. Whenever he would beg to carry me, she would give him excuses why he couldn't. And later on, she told me that it was very odd that he would ask other parents to let them borrow their kids so that he could take them to pizza or go to the arcade. Unfortunately, a lot of the parents did. When I turned 2, my parents moved to another church, still within the community, except that this one was closer to home. I would still see Jeff occasionally. However, there was one encounter about 2 years later that will stay in my mind. I remember he approached me and knelt down to my level. I remember thinking he looked very handsome and nice. He started asking me questions like where I had gotten such a pretty dress or what my favorite color was. I was the most talkative kid I have ever met, so I talked to him for what felt like forever. Suddenly, he leaned into my ear and whispered, "You will always be my princess." And then he tried to kiss me on the mouth. I spun my head so that he only managed to kiss the corner of my lips, but it left me feeling incredibly uncomfortable. I remember thinking that he wasn't acting like I was a kid, and that really weirded me out. He laughed and patted my head and walked away, and I don't remember seeing him much after that. Fast forward 3 or 4 years later, and I was the flower girl in a family friend's wedding. In between the excitement of the pretty dresses and delicious cake, I was barely aware that Jeff asked my uncle if he could let me go and play with him and a bunch of other kids. My uncle, of course, said no. And to this day, I'm so grateful he said no. I didn't see Jeff again until I was a teenager. We went to camp with my parents' church, and we were having a blast. My cousin Lisa and I are just a month apart and the best of friends, so we spent as much time together as we could. I remember we were hanging out with friends outside when Jeff walked by. He didn't notice us, but we saw him. Matthew, a boy about our age, started shaking and crying so uncontrollably that he just excused himself and disappeared. We went to look for one of our counselors, and she told me that my mom had been calling for me. So I went back to my cabin and found both my mom and my aunt there, looking extremely worried. They told us that Jeff had recently gotten out of prison for hurting children. Apparently, the day of that wedding I mentioned, Jeff had taken about 5 kids to see a play. This play consisted of him hiring a bunch of his friends to strip in front of the kids ages 10 to 15, while he jacked off. He locked 2 boys in a closet and forced them to kiss each other. The kids were so embarrassed about all of this that they said nothing. But eventually, one of the friends who stripped confessed about it. He had been in jail for a while, but Jeff had gotten out on good behavior. My mom and aunt cautioned us to stay with them or a counselor at all times. And I was pretty concerned, but Lisa, being the more adventurous of the 2 of us, said that she was not afraid of Jeff, and that he couldn't do anything to her or she'd kick his ass. We went on to have our camp activities when we started noticing that Jeff was following us everywhere. He had a big camera, and the flash of his picture always followed us. Whether we were eating or playing soccer or just talking to friends, he would always be somewhere around taking pictures of either Lisa or me. He never really approached us, though, except for giving us a wave once in a while. Like idiots, we kept quiet about it until our friends started noticing. One of our friends walked up to him and asked if he had some kind of problem, and he just brushed it off and walked away. On the last night at camp, we were supposed to have a father-daughter dinner. I was sitting at the table, and that's when Jeff walked up to us, and my heart sank. He congratulated my dad for my accomplishments and told him he thought I was so beautiful and intelligent. He tried to start a conversation with me, but I refused to respond, and my dad just said something like, "You should get back to your own hall." And he agreed. But before he left, he put his arm around me and said, "You're still my princess, right?" I fought back the urge to vomit. He walked away, and I didn't see him until later. And since it was our last night there, we were all playing with glow sticks on the grass. We'd been instructed not to leave our groups because of the danger of wild animals around. And I remember playing some dumb game when I noticed that Lisa wasn't next to me. I started panicking and told my cousin's oldest brother, Jake, about it. We started running all over the place trying to find her, but it was so dark and we only had one flashlight. Suddenly, Jake spotted her walking towards the restroom. The restrooms weren't operating, and the lights were off. We were a few yards away still, when we noticed that Jeff was walking right behind her. No flashlight or nothing. He was about 4 feet away from her, and Jake yelled at the top of his lungs, "Lisa!" And she turned at us, surprised. Jeff saw us and looked so freaking panicked, and I was so relieved to have just found her that I didn't even notice that Jeff ran away. There's no doubt in my mind that he was looking to rape her that night. And after all, that place was a dead end, and the only restrooms there were for women. He had no other reason to be there. I later found out that Brian and his brothers had also been molested by Jeff and hadn't come forward until after that camp. I know that Jeff was put back in jail sometime after this, but this all happened years ago, and I've heard he's out again living in Canada, although he sometimes does visit the U.S. To this day, he remains one of the most disgusting creepers I have ever met, and I hope I never meet him or anyone like him again. I still cringe every time I think of how he thought I was his princess. Halloween. Halloween is my favorite holiday. It is, not was, despite the events that unfolded one crisp Hallows Eve when I was about 16. At the time, I lived with my parents, younger brother, older stepbrother, and a cousin in a big but old house that sat in a cul-de-sac close to our main street of our town. Behind it ran an alleyway flanked by apartments, and I had a huge yard that my basement bedroom looked out on. We lived in a small town. Crime seemed minimal in that area, and I'd made my way out that Halloween night to make the most of the best day of the year. It wasn't just what happened that night, though. It was, of course, what came after, and one small incident that came before. A few days before Halloween, my stepbrother and cousin arrived home to discover a pickup truck full of dudes taking photos of our house. Weird, but when we approached the men, they seemed friendly and complimented our Halloween setup. It was pretty great, that's true. Then the men took off and were quickly forgotten. Later that night, my brother and cousin re-entered this story. Around 3 a.m. Both had been out drinking with their friends, and as such, both had left their respective vehicles behind and braved the icy walk home on their own. My cousin arrived home first, but he couldn't seem to get his key in the lock, so he just sat on the porch bench and waited for my stepbrother to show up, who did about a half hour later. After having a bit of a laugh at my cousin for being an uncoordinated goober, he went to unlock the door himself, and couldn't unlock the door. So they bit the bullet and called my mom, waking her up to let them in. She was, of course, unimpressed to be opening the door for a pair of drunk idiots at that time of night, and didn't buy their story about the wonky lock. They insisted, though, and to shut them up she finally relented and tried her key. She, too, could not get her key in the lock. Annoyed, tired, and now just confused, she wrote it off as a problem for the next day, and the three of them hit the respective hay. One other person arrived home that night, though. Me. Though I arrived much earlier than those two, and was in bed by about midnight, I woke up around 1 a.m. Still tired, all I could feel was anxiety for some reason. I didn't know why. At first I tried to tell myself that I had just gotten a bit too into the holiday spirit and had been psyching myself out. But that's when I noticed a shadow. It was a perfectly man-shaped shadow, and it was cast on my window. I turned on my bedside lamp, blinked, and then it was gone. It wasn't unusual, mind you, to see the shadows of people harmlessly walking through the alleyway, and I told myself that that's all it was. Then there was what happened after. I came home from school the next day, and my parents were there. So was a locksmith, and so were the police. My parents were there because, well, that's where they lived. The locksmith was there because my mother had called him as the confusion over the broken lock persisted. The cops were there because the locksmith and my parents had called them when the locksmith proceeded to pull out the tip of a knife from our lock. I was relieved to see that that's where the knife tip had ended up, though. They also discovered 2 of our window screens had been slashed, one in our garage and one on my bedroom window. Weirdo on the road. I am a female, and this happened to me as a 20-year-old college junior. I'd been home alone, and I decided to take a walk over to Turkey Hill, about a mile away, mostly just for the heck of it. At the time, I walked about 5 miles a day between going to classes, work, or just walking for fun. And this particular route I walked almost daily, but always with my male roommate. It was 6:30 when I left my apartment, and still bright out due to it being summer. I walked along the side of the road, enjoying the sunshine, texting away on my phone as my generation often does. That's when a big, bright red Ford Explorer pulled up next to me at around 6:35. I knew what time it was because my phone was out. A voice called out, "Hey, hun, you want a ride?" "No, I don't want a ride," I said back. "Are you sure? I can take you anywhere you want to go." I replied, "Yeah, I'm quite sure, no thanks." And all the while, I tried to stay fairly cheerful. I tend to hope for the best in people, And it wasn't uncommon for men in cars to beep at me or slow down to shout harmless compliments, as boys in college towns often do. But this encounter was different from the rest. For starters, this guy was not a boy. He was a man in his mid-40s, and his face will forever be seared in my brain. He was chubby, white, and about 5'10", with short brown hair, and he was wearing a navy blue polo, sunglasses, and a big old smile. He looked just like any suburban dad you might meet on the street, and for all I knew, he was one. After my polite refusal, the man drove slowly next to me for a few moments before finally driving away. I took my first real breath and shook my head for being worried. And then I checked my phone for a moment, and when I looked up, that same cherry-red Explorer made a sudden and illegal U-turn in the middle of a three-way intersection not far from where I was. The vehicle came at me with alarming speed and stopped hastily just a few feet from where I stood, paralyzed with fear and confusion. He opened his door and stepped out, still smiling that suburban smile, looking right at me. My mouth was dry, and I still couldn't fully process what was going on. I mean, was he lost? Did his car break down? I finally said, "Are you okay?" And he turned to look at me, my voice sounding meek. He didn't speak. He just continued moving, continued smiling that suburban smile, and walked slowly towards me. It's hard to explain why this slow walk was so terrifying, and why that specifically haunted my dreams for so many nights to come. He seemed almost like a lion about to pounce on his prey. It was at that moment that I became aware that everything was not okay. I screamed as loud as one can when fear is choking them, and I started running. I bolted onto the grass in the direction of a house, maybe 10 yards away. In moments, I felt my attacker's hands around my waist, pulling me in the direction of his vehicle. As we struggled, I was acutely aware of the steady progress we were making in the direction of his vehicle, and it became very real for me that I might end up one of those people on the news. All I could think was, no, so much so that I began angrily saying it out loud. I threw myself to the ground in the opposite direction of his vehicle, and as he came down with me, I somehow ended up on my back. My first thought was to go to my pepper spray that I usually kept in my purse front pocket, but I delved my hands inside, which was difficult as he was utilizing the time my hands were preoccupied to beat my face. That's when I realized the spray wasn't there, and my heart sank. He had my legs mostly pinned, and I was thrashing for all I was worth. I started to feel his hands moving underneath my dress, pulling it up and grabbing my ass, and I noticed he wasn't trying to move me to the car anymore. I could feel his body pressing heavier against me. Fear flashed through me as I realized where this was going. The nails on my hands found his face of their own accord, and his sunglasses were shifted slightly up as I went for his eyes. This pushed his face away from me and in the direction of the road, where I found out later several cars had slowed to a crawl to watch this scene unfold. Apparently, that's when he noticed the crowd he was drawing and decided it was best for him to leave. As quickly as he'd been on me, he was gone. He swaggered back to his vehicle, looked at me, and then smiled that creepy suburban smile before getting in. I leapt up and ran towards him, livid and confused and not willing to let him get away, yet unsure how to proceed. I tend to be fairly well-spoken, and I'm no stranger to insults, but at the time my outraged mind could only spit out, "Hey!" before he finally sped off. It's weird that I didn't cry until after I found a house and called the police. I had lost my phone in the shuffle and didn't find it until later that night. But I did find out later that the house that it happened in front of had people home, but they elected not to help me. When I knocked on their door afterwards, they just pretended they weren't home. The only time people started to come forward with their versions of what happened was after the police had arrived, and some sick excitement to get their 15 minutes of fame overcame them. Yeah, thanks for nothing. By the way, the man was never caught. The Cable Guy. This story happened to my family, specifically to my mother. My family had been having some issues with our new television. It was overheating, and the picture had been coming in and out with lines. My stepfather, not knowing too much about television sets, called Comcast to come check out the issue for us. Neither my stepfather or mother specifically described what had been going on at all. The next day, my mom had been home by herself with my baby sister, who was 2 at the time, and our dogs. We live on a farm, kind of in the middle of nowhere, and this cable man arrived and was driving an unmarked white pickup truck and wearing a uniform with no logos. As soon as he pulled up, our 2 dogs started going ballistic, and the dogs never bark at anyone and are extremely friendly most of the time. The man got out of his truck as my mom and sister greeted him outside, and instantly my mom said that she had this horrible feeling. The man started to describe to her the exact problem our television had been having without being told anything. Instead of going inside the house to take a look, he stayed outside and used a simple ladder to get to a power box. And although my mom couldn't tell for certain, he didn't seem to be doing much at all. Later, the man left without saying goodbye or asking for payment or anything. That evening, my mother was telling us about the strange experience she had and how strange the man was when our phone rang. It was Comcast, saying that they were very sorry for the delay and that they would be sending someone out to look at our television. My stepfather told him that someone had already been out there that day, and they were surprised as they had no record of anyone having been out. The TV worked fine for another week, and then the issues started again. And when a repairman arrived, his truck, uniform, and everything was clearly marked. He asked to come inside, checked everything out, and fixed it. Then he had us sign papers, and everything was fine. So, we're not really sure who that first man was that visited our home, or how he knew so much about our television problem. The Guy in My House. I'm 22, and this incident happened 1.5 years ago. I just moved into my first apartment and was in the process of fully moving in. The door that led into my apartment locks itself automatically when closed, so I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my boyfriend. I returned to my apartment and sat on the bed while opening the mail while I was still on the phone. I mistakenly dropped it on the floor, and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch out for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened, and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still with his back towards me and his head to his chest, so I couldn't see his face, and he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone and said, "Oh, sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm going to go take a shower and I'll call you back." The bathroom was right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, quietly locked the door, and turned the shower on, then promptly jumped out the window and called the police. They told me to wait nearby, but to go across the street and see if anyone came out of the door to the apartment complex. This was during summer, and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my boyfriend, and he came to me just before the police. I gave them my house keys, and they went inside. Moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin and tired-looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. One of the policemen stood beside me and comforted me while the other police searched through my house, and told me that the man had stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives. He was waiting for me to come out, and that's where they found him. The man had somehow crept in my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless guy and was placed in a mental hospital. My boyfriend? He moved in with me the very next day. Guy at the mall. This happened about 2.5 years ago. I was 19 at the time, and I was kicked out of my house. I was living with a friend, Bethany, who lived in a more secluded town, and I immediately fell in love with her family. Other than Bethany, I became very attached to her 13-year-old sister, Lainey. I never had a little sister, so this was my chance to have one. Well, one day, Bethany, Lainey, and myself went to the mall, just to blow off some steam. We had our fun, but we realized it was time to go. Before we left, we stopped into one more store. This store had some offbeat things, piercings, shirts that had funny sayings about sex, and in the back was a sex toy area. Lainey happened to be looking at some wallets that were very near the sex toy area, and Bethany and myself were looking at jewelry. We weren't too far from her, and she was old enough to take care of herself in a store, but I still kept an eye on her. And I am glad I did, because some guy came up to Lainey holding something quite mature. Bethany, who was much more soft-spoken than I am, asked me to go over to Lainey, and I was already on my way over. I heard him saying to her, "Yeah, this thing right here is a lot of fun. You can come play with my sister." And that's all I heard before snatching Lainey away. The guy was about my age, and he looked all sorts of greasy. I glared at him for a few moments before telling him to go eat a bag of dicks, and he started calling me some nasty names, but I didn't care. We just left. We had parked in a secluded parking lot. There were about 3 cars sitting in the lot, a nice blue car, and a white van that was about 2 spots away from Bethany's car. This van was your stereotypical pedo van, and we all saw it. So we started making jokes. Lainey saw that it had a GMC logo on it, and she started laughing and shouted that GMC stood for Give Me Children. Too obvious. But then, as if on cue, we heard a light rustle from inside the van. We all stopped and looked at each other. We all heard it. We thought maybe we were just hearing things, but then Bethany looked worried. Suddenly, we heard muffled screams coming from inside the van. I'm a very maternal person, so I immediately took charge. I took out my phone, but there was no service. Honestly, my phone had really shitty service. But then I remembered Bethany didn't take her phone anywhere, and Lainey didn't have one. I told Bethany and Lainey to get in the car and lock the doors, and if anyone came out to the van to just drive away. But in the meantime, memorize and write down the make and the license plate of the vehicle. I dashed back inside the mall and started making the biggest ruckus I could. I didn't know where the mall police were. It wasn't my mall. In retrospect, I could have just asked someone to call the police or mall police or whatever, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I just started yelling and screaming and knocking things over. It didn't take long for some of the mall police to come over, and I immediately told them about the van and the muffled screams. They called the real police, and thus started a long evening. They brought Bethany and Lainey in, and we stayed inside. We watched from parking lot security screens as they pulled out a bound and gagged girl from the van. She looked about Lainey's age. Then 2 cops sat in Bethany's car and waited. Eventually, the creep from the last store that we had been in walked up to the van. The police got out and made an arrest. I guess the girl was his younger sister. and things were settled outside of court. I didn't see anything about it in the papers. I'm guessing the family probably wanted to keep it private. Bethany and Lainey and myself were pretty shaken up over it all. But we did get some free ice cream out of it, and that was cool. I guess what I learned from this was A, creeps can be a wide variety of ages, and B, sometimes the creeper van is actually a creeper van. It was me. I'm a 28-year-old male living in the Deep South. I am a functional, medicated, and therapy-attending paranoid schizophrenic. However, I wasn't always this way, and this story comes from a time before I even knew what was wrong with me. It was about April of 2007 when this happened. I had just come out of a painful divorce, and my ex had taken all of my friends away from me in the process. I was obviously trying to reach out to anyone I could, but I had severe codependency issues that I didn't know how to address. Anyway, I found myself wandering the game section of my local Walmart as I was still a gamer at heart, and I had to see what was available. Things were going all right, and I seemed to be in control of myself. And then he appeared. This poor, unsuspecting soul started to talk to me about the new World of Warcraft, which I had yet to play. I perked up at that point, thinking that I could make a new friend that hadn't been taken from me. We made casual jokes and talked about the new expansion pack. And at that point, his mother came by and took him to another aisle. He didn't say goodbye, he just walked off, and like that our conversation was over. But in my mind, we had made a connection. We had bonded. In my sick and twisted state, I thought he would appreciate it if we hung out for a while. So I followed him. I made a point to casually stroll down the aisles that he happened to be visiting and strike up conversations with him about different things, even telling jokes. I don't remember all of it. I could tell he was getting creeped out by the third time that I did this, and he started getting this deer in headlights look every time he saw me. It was starting to become a horror story, though in my eyes it was perfectly natural. At some point, however, this fight or flight must have kicked in because when I appeared, as soon as I opened mouth to say anything to him, he just screamed, "Leave me alone!" dragging his mother away as quickly as he possibly could. This was a wake-up call for me, that I was being severely creepy and also a stalker. I realized that this could very well be the behavior that caused my divorce in the first place. I checked myself into a mental institution soon after this and got the help I needed. I'm now much better, and my relationships with people have improved greatly. I now have good friends and a loving fiancé. Not all creepers mean to be creepy. Some of us just need proper psychiatric help. On behalf of all the unknowing and good-intentioned creepers out there, I humbly and sincerely apologize for our behavior. It doesn't make what we've done forgivable, but I hope it does get some context as to what goes on in the mind of a creeper. Thanks for your time. Stranger in the Dormitory. It was the fall semester of my second year of college. No longer a freshman, I felt I had a pretty strong grasp on campus life. A female friend of mine from high school, who I admit I had always found attractive, had just started school and was living in the dorms and often required my services as an experienced sophomore co-ed. One evening, she asked if I wanted to come over to watch a movie on her crappy 12-inch TV. Knowing that meant being cuddly on a bed, the only seating for two in her cramped dorm room, I accepted her offer. The movie ended, and curfew was quickly approaching. Due to the dorm's policies on boys after 11, I began to put on my shoes in preparation for my departure. That's when she grabbed my shoulder, and I instantly saw a look of worry in her eyes and realized she had kind of seemed off all night long. She finally confided in me. She told me that over the past 2 nights, some guy, was knocking on her door. He did it so softly that when she finally woke up, she wasn't really sure how long he had been there. And he talked and repeated himself. He would ask her if she was sleeping and if he could come in. So far up until that point, she said that she'd said nothing back to him. She just lay there with the blankets up to her chin. It would go on for about an hour, and then the guy would just stop and would be gone. She finally asked her neighbors if they had heard anything or had similar experiences, and they said no. Now, it was college. I wasn't too worried. There could be any number of explanations, and most likely a prank. Maybe even perpetrated by her supposedly unknowing neighbors. The dorm was pretty secure. The hallway lights were always on, and the exterior doors were locked after 11. It had to be a prank. But to console my upset friend, I agreed to stay the night in case the events were to recur. And much to my dismay, I slept on the floor. But I did sleep. Honestly, I wasn't super concerned. If it did happen again, I'd just cowboy up, tell the guy off, then hopefully spend the rest of the night next to a grateful warm body beneath neon purple bed sheets. I was in a deep sleep when a slight tap on my shoulder abruptly woke me up. It took me a minute to remember where I was and regain my equilibrium, but shortly after doing so, I heard the knocking. But it was really more of a tapping, very soft, almost gentle. It paused about every 4 or 5 beats, and the only light in the room was the light coming from under the door in the hallway, with the exception of the 2 shadows made by the individual's feet. I looked at my friend, not sure how long she had been awake, and as her face came into focus, I began to register her terror. This was the first time this whole thing had actually started to get to me. Then, in a moment of vulnerability, I heard the voice. I quickly shot my attention back to the door. "Are you sleeping sweetly? Sweetly, are you sleeping? Can I come in? Let me in." Shivers shot up my spine. This guy's voice was soft, yet rough. It didn't sound like that of some young student. While talking, he didn't even pause in his rhythmic tapping. The taps just kept going over his words, almost muffling them. I quietly stood up and slowly approached the door, and I stopped at it to get a better listen. He kept repeating a variation of the same words, sleeping and sweetly. Was he even mixing up parts of the words like, "Are you sweeping sweetly?" This slurred dialect led me to believe that maybe this was a drunk who somehow consistently stumbled his way into the dorm and harassed my friend. And after he finished asking for entry once again, I took down a warm gulp of air and finally spoke up. Hey guy, you got the wrong place. Why don't you get lost?" The tapping abruptly stopped. There were no more words. I instantly wished I had thought of something cooler to say, but it seemed to do the trick. But then I looked down to the floor, and the shadows of his feet still remained. It was probably only a few seconds, but it seemed like a lot longer, when one by one the shadows disappeared and he walked away. I let out a sigh of relief and then looked back at my friend. Seeing her grateful smile and teary eyes made me feel like a badass. It apparently made me walk like a badass too, as I noticed I had a bit of a strut as I walked back to her side. As I prepared to return to the floor, she scooted against the wall and pulled open the sheets beside her. I looked at the open spot of the mattress and then back to her. She gave me a cutesy smile and a reassuring nod. I comically jumped in like a kid at the pool on the first day of summer. We both laughed, then nestled in closer. That's when the tapping returned. I popped up with a mixed fuel of fear and anger. The shadows had also returned. This jerk just made me go from badass to punk ass in less than 2 minutes. I jumped up, rushed the door, and shouted as I stopped, "Hey man, I told you to get the hell out of here." I stopped at the door with my hand on the knob. There was no response from the other side. I would have killed for a peephole, but I was honestly afraid to crack the door open. Then, after a beat, a voice spoke up. "This is the RA. Boys are not allowed on the premises overnight. For the safety of the girls, you'll have to leave or I'll report your friend." My friend let out a, "Oh, crap," then jumped up to answer the door. She put on a pair of pajama pants that were under the covers, and I gritted my teeth in disappointment, realizing she at some point in the ordeal had slipped them off. She ran next to me and then opened the door. "Sorry," she said to the RA, and then tried to explain. "You see, there was this guy who—" But the RA interrupted her. "Under no circumstances should a boy stay overnight in the dorm, nor should you sit helplessly in a dangerous situation," the RA said. "If someone were to actually come to you or any of the other girls' doors at night, you should dial 4 on your phone for campus security, or report the incident to me. You've been the only one we had to visit multiple times. Now get your guy friend out of here." So, it turned out the whole thing was some RA's idea of teaching the girls a valuable lesson. And in fact, half the girls in the hall had experienced the same incident, also known as the RA's boyfriend. She was only wishing to break the very rules she was enforcing by letting her boyfriend in at night. But she was also doing this bizarre lesson without the knowledge of the school. Later, my friend filed a complaint, and the RA was relieved of her duties. Freak in the golf cart. This happened a little while ago. From 2013 to 2015, I worked night shift security at an RV resort. I was on my way to work one night when my front driver's side tire blew out on a long, narrow dirt road. It was around 10:30, so it was pretty dark. I live in a very secluded area in upstate Florida, and this road was not near any neighborhoods and only had a few streetlights. My shift started at 11, so I called the manager and told her that I might be a little late because I had to change the tire. After I got that all squared away, I pulled out my car jack and started to position it underneath my Ranger. I was about to start cranking away when I saw the dim glow of some golf cart headlights approaching me from down the street, in the direction that I had just come from. I thought it was probably a local wondering what was going on, and maybe they would be nice enough to give me a hand. The golf cart stopped behind my truck, and I stood up from where I was crouching and said, "Hey, one of my tires just blew out. You wouldn't mind giving me a hand, would you? I'm kind of running late for work." The person in the golf cart did not respond, but I did hear them getting out of the golf cart. The person got between the headlights of their own golf cart and my vehicle. The light was dim, so it was kind of hard to see, but he looked like a middle-aged man with no shirt on, so I could clearly see his beer gut. He also had hairy legs, and I could see that something was dangling under his massive stomach. Turns out, he was completely naked. That's something I could have lived my entire life without seeing. And then the man seemed to be holding something in his hands. I only caught a quick look at the object. Dick jokes aside, the thing that this guy was holding looked like a machete. He didn't say a word as he slowly started to walk towards me. I quickly jumped back in my truck, started it up, and noped the fuck out of there. I didn't have time to grab my car jack, so I just left it behind. Of course, my truck was lopsided from the deflated tire, and it awkwardly accelerated forward. I could see in my interior mirror that the headlights of the golf cart were still close behind me. Despite my truck having a flat tire, I was still going at a decent speed. But the golf cart was too, and he continued to tail me. In a split-second decision, I slammed the brakes of my Ranger, and not even a second later, I heard and felt the golf cart smash into my rear end. I rolled down my window and shouted, "Fuck you, creep!" and sped off. I managed to get to work on time. Then I explained everything to the manager, and we called the cops. They searched the road but didn't find any signs of the guy or the golf cart. But they did find my car jack, which they returned to me. Other than a few minor dents, the back of my truck didn't look bad at all. I'm sure that golf cart had it 10 times worse. He had to have been going full speed when he crashed into me. And actually, I was surprised he was able to drive it away at all. I've come to the conclusion that this weirdo was on a serious meth high because that area does have that kind of reputation. I no longer own that truck or work at that site anymore. A creepy, bare-ass, overweight, machete-wielding psychopath? For the love of God, I hope you put some fucking pants on. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard, please give my video a thumbs up. It helps the algorithm. And if you do have a moment, leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of the stories. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. If you haven't subscribed, hey, why not subscribe? Maybe even tell a friend about the channel. I sure would appreciate it. Follow me on social media. Links to that are in the description below. And if you'd like to take your support of what I'm doing a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, or consider purchasing some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my storefront at tpublic.com is in the description too. Switching up some microphones here, guys, so let me know what you think of the sound of this one. Playing around with some things, and yeah, I'd just like to get your opinion of how you think this one sounds. I appreciate your feedback. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door. Or a guy in a golf cart driving around with no pants on.